Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day I explore how technology is transforming our life, business, industry, and even world. And every day I try to learn from successful tech leaders who sit down and share their story with me. And today I'm excited to get today's guest onto the podcast, one of my tech heroes. And his name is Dr. Mike Lynch, and he's a celebrated technologist, entrepreneur and investor. And having founded and led some of the UK's most successful tech companies, including Autonomy, Blinkx and Cambridge Neurodynamics, Mike then created Invoke Capital back in 2012 to create and support world-leading fundamental tech businesses, which again will be names that you should know well, such as Darktrace and Luminance. And he is often referred to as UK's answer to Bill Gates, and he was awarded the OBE for services to enterprises back in 2006. And was also elected to the Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology in 2011. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Suffolk here in the UK, where I invite you to join me and Mike in conversation. So a massive warm welcome to the podcast today. How's life treating you?
It's nice. I'm out. One of the upsides in lockdown is I got to spend a lot more time in Suffolk, which I love, which is a sort of secret county. Not as many people know about Suffolk as ought to, and I'm going to keep it that way. But, and you know, the thing is, you never normally stop to see stuff like spring. You know, it's just amazing. Every day I go out with the dog and, you know, you just watch it all happening. It's incredible. So I'm one of those awfully annoying people that says, actually, I got something out of lockdown.
No, I completely agree with you. I'm exactly the same. I start my day, I take my dog for a walk. It seems like all our senses have been heightened over the last 12 months, and you start noticing things like the birds singing in the trees and nature and so much more. We all seem to be much more grounded. And speaking of which, you have come from humble beginnings where your mother was a nurse and your father was a fireman, and you've enjoyed an inspirational career since then, of course. And we'll have people listening all over the world at the very beginning of their tech journey. So for those people listening, can I ask that you share the moment that lit the spark with that love of technology and what it was that put you on the path that you're on today?
Look, the first thing is, dear old dad gave me a great piece of advice, which was, son, try and get a job that doesn't involve running into burning buildings. But I followed that one. You know, I must say, though, you know, we kind of don't mention it anymore, but, you know, firefighters are amazing people.
Yeah.
You know, the things he used to have to do and got done. But so anyway, I took that advice. But no, the story in for me into tech is, I don't know if you remember, because you may be of a similar vintage there, Neil, he says dangerously, Fame. Okay,
yes.
So Fame was a massive show, and there was all the cool kids, you know, and Irene Cara was the sort of star of it and everything. But there was one bloke everyone else has forgotten who was who I wanted to be. I wanted to be Bruno, the keyboards guy, you know, whose dad...
The guy with the big hair, right?
That's right. And I was desperate to be Bruno. And by the way, with the exception of Irene Cara, I think most of the cast have not ended up in good places, but apparently Bruno's a big Hollywood producer, so it worked out all right for him. But the big problem was I could never have afforded a synthesizer on the old paper round. And so I sat down one day and said, well, anyway, I'm going to get one of these is to build it. And then at the time, so we are talking 80s here, the big thing was sampling had just come in. And the machine that did sampling was an Australian thing called the Fairlight, and like Duran Duran had one, all that stuff. And it was $100,000 back then. So I guess if I'd saved the paper round money, I'd just be about ready to buy one. So anyway, I set out to build a sampler, and it was like all those things in that, you know, because it was a passion, you learned everything you needed to know, and ended up building a cheap sampler. Got a manufacturer sold to design to manufacturer. And as part of that, I learned all about signal processing, which then lent on to pattern recognition and machine learning and all that sort of stuff, very similar maths. But I also learned about, budgets and how to do a sales pitch and all that sort of stuff. And so it turned out it was the transition really into, love of tech into an actual business. Music business is very difficult though, because everyone does it for love. Yeah. So it's hard to make money, but I used to have such fun because when I used to design these things, they used to send me off. The big show for musical instruments is actually in Frankfurt of all places. And I'd end up in Frankfurt, but with a whole load of musicians because they'd be there to do the demos. And without getting into too much detail, the funnest people in the world are session musicians, but you never let your daughter near them.
I love that. And was your dreams of becoming the next Bruno Martelli? That
was it. That was it. I was quite happy not to be the one on stage, but I was there, and it ended up being a really good business. So I did a lot of big synths of the 80s. Sadly, the guy that wrote the software design hardware didn't get a sort of sleeve credit. Otherwise, I'd be on some of those. But it was really exciting time. It was great. Suddenly, musically, you could just do stuff you couldn't do before. It was incredible. Yeah. The only casualty of it is I've got the old hearing aids now because the problem was that the real musos was deaf as posts because they, turned up the whole volume to 11. And the problem was I turned up with my lovely young ears and have to be sitting next to them as they started, using the new thing. And so I paid the price for it, but anyway.
Excellent. And fast forward to present day, and we have Darktrace. And for any startup founders that are listening at any various stage of their career and worrying about things like trying to get funding, etc., what stands out for me about Darktrace is it wasn't created through a normal venture capital funded startup process. So can I ask, what did you do differently, and why do you think that mattered?
So having done 4 or 5 tech businesses before, the one thing you realise is in the UK, you've got amazing ideas, you've got great science base, you've got great entrepreneurs in technology sense, but it's not like the Valley where once someone's got a great idea, you can hit the Rolodex and get them a marketing person, a support person, and all that sort of stuff. So what we realised was that what we had to do was put a lot of those pieces in, and we knew all the people that had done that from the previous companies. And so we had a model where, we'll basically, you get on with the clever bit, we'll sort out the rest of it around. And so, Darktrace was an interesting one because it was a kind of mixture in that I was on the board of the BBC, controversial organisation at the time, and the celeb salaries were appearing in the tabloids. And so, because I was the only technical one on the board, they said, Mike, go and find out, deal with this. And suddenly I realised that it was the insiders doing it. It was people that, were actually employed. And back then, the only thing people ever thought about cybersecurity was build this massive great wall around everything and keep everyone out. And they forgot that they let everyone in the morning. And so I started thinking, well, there's got to be a different approach here because you've got to assume that the attacker's in. And I remember the New York Times got hacked, and I just remember hearing an interview and someone said, yeah, well, we're never going to get them out. Now that they're in that far, they're never going out. And so sort of had that idea. And then Jack Stockdale, who's an amazing technology guy, decided to try and create it and put it together. And that was brilliant, and some people from the spooky world joined it because they were used to fighting the sort of nation state hackers. And it went forward. And the funnest bit for me is always when it's like 10 of you and it's the whiteboard and before it gets big. When it gets big, there's people that like doing that, but I love the early days. I remember once there was a BBC dramatisation of the early days of sort of Acorn and all that,
Yeah.
And I was just watching this thing, and some guy was playing Herman Hauser, who was far cuter than Herman Hauser and all that sort of stuff. But at one point, they start eating a takeaway meal using oscilloscope probes because they haven't got any cutlery. And I thought, well, whoever wrote this has nailed it, because I remember that. So in the early days, we started like that, and then gave them the sort of experience they needed to help them do stuff like set up Salesforce and all those bits. And your area of support is so important, but people who've got great ideas don't necessarily have any experience of how you do that sort of stuff, but it really matters. And that got the ball rolling.
It really does. And like I said, we will have people listening and looking up to you and the huge success that you've had. So a question I'd love to ask is, how important is it for any tech firm or tech startup out there to have a reliable, steady flow of capital and practical business support? Because I think it's often overlooked, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the practical business support's crucial. You don't want to be reinventing the wheel, especially when it's the bit that there are other people that know how to do. So, one of the problems we have in the UK is often the VCs don't actually have any practical support running anything. They're all finance people. So try and find some people that really know how to run. And it doesn't need to be tech, If you run a mechanic's garage for 15 years, you know how the world works. And that's really useful if you've got no experience in business. So do that. And then the thing that we try and do is we just want to take the whole funding headache away. So once we start, we'll just stick with it as long as it takes. And then that way, again, the person actually doing the tech can just get on with it and not worry about continual rounds of funding and all this sort of stuff. And I think the other thing is, there are some predatory actions in the VC industry. I don't get technical on it, but there's all these things called preference shares and stuff like that. And you want to avoid all that stuff if you can, because it's just a nightmare. Sometimes it's amazing to me how often the money people forget that the business isn't like buying a block of gold. It's a living thing, and if you mess with it, you kill it. So it's better that it grows and you kind of try and get the last little bit out of it. So you try and create an environment where people can actually get their idea going. And then the other one is, I've almost never found a tech business that's ended up doing what it started doing. And so one of the big things is realizing that there will come a day when a good entrepreneur walks into you and says, you gave me all that money to do X. Well, I've talked to some customers and they don't want X, but they really want Z. And you need to have that conversation. It needs to be open enough relationship, because the worst thing you see is when someone raises loads of money and keeps doing something which you should have worked out isn't going to go anywhere. A little bit of, to use the technology phrase, pivoting is quite important once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I always try and do every day on this Daily Tech podcast is speak to people all over the world and put where they live on the map and hear more about the tech startup scene in that area. And obviously you're in the UK with me here, and with Brexit and so many other things going on, there's so much going on in the tech industry. I'm curious, from your point of view, what does Silicon Valley have that the UK doesn't?
Well, I think the first thing is there is that depth of the old Rolodex there. So when someone walks in with a brilliant idea on the technology side, you can put together a team out there, and that's harder here. And, that know-how is important. So that's why models like the one I have, where I have a whole load of slightly older people who've done it all before, that will do they don't do the magic bit. The technologist has to do that. That's what they're doing. But we do all of the rest of it to get them started. And then gradually over time, we back out. I think that's a good model. A lot's gone right in the UK. We've got amazing technology science base. We've got amazing creative people, whether it be tech or music industry or whatever. We're just second to none in a lot of that stuff. We've got great startups now. That's all changed from when I started. We've got funding. What we haven't got is the big listed companies. And the reason for that is that at about 400 million, they get sold out in the UK and they don't go on. And we need them to do that, because, if we have a $20, $30 billion tech business listed in London, that trains a lot of people who go off and do the next generation of stuff. So that's the thing I'm concentrating on at the moment, is trying to get the policy changes. So I've kind of fought this battle all the way through. When I started, you couldn't list a company in London without 3 years of profits, and you couldn't give share options to your staff, and all that sort of thing. That's all fixed now, and we have a lot of great mid-sized companies. We're just going to make sure that they don't sell out.
And do you think we still need to get better at turning ideas that came out of university seminar rooms into saleable products?
Yeah, so there's 2 problems there, I think. One is the universities need a bit of a kick. So John Bell, who's the guy you see on the news from Oxford about the vaccine and all that stuff, was saying the other day that some of the vice chancellors are just far too greedy. So, before even a flicker of an idea gets put into something commercial, they want people to sign up to 30% royalties, that just kills it. What's much better is a model where the university just says, look, we'll make it effortless for you to take an idea out. Here's a standard agreement, no lawyer cost, but we'll hold on to, 4% of the company. And you just do that for hundreds of things. And then it's like throwing seeds on the floor. Some of them grow into big trees. But if you're going to, so that needs changing. I think that's very important. To actually make that happen. I think the attitude has changed. If you go to somewhere like UCL, to the machine learning class, and you ask them what they're doing, all those people want to do a startup. So that's very different from my day where, son, you need to go and work in a bank. Well, that didn't work out too well, did it? So no, it's different. It's moving the right way. And I think, we will get this last bit done. We'll start to see more dark traces and things like that. And then that will really move us forward in the UK.
And if we look at that big battle between, let's say, New York and London in attracting big tech IPOs, how do you see that playing out right now? And any changes you see coming as well?
Well, I think it's been a massive problem because, if you look at the FTSE 100, there's Sage, which is a perfectly competent software company, but we're not talking, the fast lane there.
Yeah.
And then there isn't a lot of fundamental tech. And, what we've got to be really careful is that in 10 years' time, our London market doesn't look like some sort of historical park for old business model companies. So it's really important that we fix it. But there hasn't been a lot of fundamental tech listing in London. So, I don't count the Deliveroo's of the world because to me, they're just tech-enabled businesses. A bloke on a bike with a burger and an app is not tech.
Yeah.
But Darktrace is good. I think we hopefully will get some more of those. People are talking about Oxford Nanopore coming through, and GraphCore is going to be a great business if we can get that listed in London. I'm very keen on GraphCore at the moment because I've become a bit addicted to Microsoft Flight Sim. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's incredible. You can fly anywhere; it looks just like the place. And so I've gone back to that situation where having to get into it, and of course the great thing about the world now is it's online. So when you finally manage to get hold of an NVIDIA, 3080, which is it's a bit like sort of buying some sort of illicit substance somewhere because it's like a bit black market. But anyway, you get one of these things, you plug it into your Alienware PC, and it's too bloody long for the slot, and you have to take the thing apart.
And in that Microsoft Flight Sim, is there still that huge building that goes into the clouds that somebody put in there? Have you come across that?
It's all getting a bit serious now. So, there's the hardcore mob, that get really upset when a button on the A320 whatever is 3 centimetres to the left of where it is on the real plane. And then there are nutters like me that just like sort of flying under bridges and that sort of stuff. But I do, the only thing I'd say about it, I do think it's a phenomenon. It's not like a normal game in the sense that it is recreating the actual world. And now you've got people, putting dogs in it and everything. And I think there's something fundamental going on there. It's like a digital twin of the world. And because it's got such a strong following, there's lots of people adding stuff to it. It's got perfect weather and everything. So there's something going on there that I haven't quite nailed, but it's going to be big.
Yeah, I think you're bang on the money there. I was reading recently, I think it's the CEO of NVIDIA talking about the Metaverse and creating a digital twin of the entire planet there and having that up in the cloud and maybe migrating stuff between the two. It's incredible where we're heading, isn't it?
Well, the only thing, I'm going to give you a sad moment now. So okay. I'm someone who still gets excited when I buy a 1 terabyte disk drive. Just because I come from the era of 64K,
Yeah.
And with my NVIDIA stuff, I reckon I have more teraflops in my front room now than there were in the world when I did my degree.
Oh, no, completely with you on that. Especially as a man of a certain age, I come from the age of acorn electrons and BBCB, so I completely get that. It's worth highlighting as well that you're an investor as well as a technologist. So I'm curious, especially for those startup founders listening. What sort of ideas and pictures do you want to see on your desk? Because I'm sure you get bombarded with ones that you don't want to see. But what does it take to get on your radar?
Well, I'm only good at doing a business if I've got an unfair advantage. So, I don't know if you remember in Indiana Jones where he's in the marketplace and the guy sort of wielding the big saber, he pulls out a gun and goes bang. So I always say, always take a gun to a knife fight. And what I mean by that is I want something where the technology is so good that even if you're not the world's best at marketing or whatever, it doesn't matter because it's just so good. So, what I look for is people that turn up with something that fundamentally, there's a fundamental bit of tech. There's something in there that's really clever. So I'm not the person to send you a great new, e-commerce idea to, but if you've solved something that we're doing something a different way, then I'm really interested in seeing those things. And I don't mind whether it's an established company or it's just an idea in someone's head. That doesn't bother me. The thing that matters is whether there's something different here, different way of doing something.
Yeah, that's the Chicago way, bringing the gun to the knife fight, and the Sean Connery Untouchables reference there as well that you managed to sneak in.
A number of times, I used to get sent, it goes through phases, Facebook but better for a long time. There's a lot of people do that. By the time, whatever it is out there, you're not going to displace it unless you're radically better. So, people need to sort of wait for the right idea. Sometimes they get going a little bit. And one of the ironies is at the moment, the VC market's very frothy, which means that the wrong idea can get funded. And that's actually a disaster because you waste 4 years doing something where you really shouldn't have started it. So it's always important to wait until you've got the right idea.
Absolutely. And one industry that's always accused of being slow of adapting to change is the legal industry. And I think that is turning into a bit of a myth now because the industry does seem to be adopting at a rapid rate. And the reason I mention this is you have another firm based around machine learning called Luminance. And I'm curious, how is AI going to change the legal industry in your view?
Oh, I think it's going to change it massively. So at the end of the day, ironically, if you forget the history, the legal business is about data.
Yeah.
Customers, cases, all that sort of stuff. And the amount of data is going up exponentially. You can easily get 15 million documents in a matter now. So it has to change. Now, doctors and lawyers can be very resistant to change. So one of the two groups that take the longest. So, a few years back, I did a diagnosis support tool for the doctors because 11% of diagnoses were wrong. Mm-hmm. And that leads not only to a lot of people dying, but it leads to cost as you treat them for the wrong thing. Yet there was a lot of pushback from the doctors because it's one of those things where when it's a judgment, you don't like something that might point out that you haven't made the best judgment because I think there's sometimes they want the patients to feel that the doctor knows what the answer is. And so the professions can be a little slow. Now, that's all changing because, at the end of the day, the benefits of these things are so strong. And you saw that for a while with the lawyers. But you're right, that's gone now. They're embracing technology at an amazing rate. And a lot of it's to do with the fact that, just like you saw in IT, there was a lot of outsourcing. So, a lot of the menial legal stuff was being shipped off to India. And so, people weren't making margins. So they need to concentrate on the stuff where they can add real value and be clever and let the machines do the sort of, reviewing 100,000 documents, which the machine can do much faster and doesn't get bored and doesn't fall asleep. So, no, it's a really good area. It's not one of those ones that are exciting. I'd love to be talking to you about holographic displays, which is, but just think about it. Computer meets contract happens all over the world every day. And that's a great opportunity.
And there have been a few examples, haven't there, of how long it takes lawyers to sift through pages and pages and pages of data, and compared to AI, and what could take a lawyer weeks and weeks or even months can take AI seconds or minutes, can't it?
Yeah, and the thing about AI is it can often make connections that it would be very hard because there's so much data, one person doesn't review everything anymore.
Yeah.
And this was a lesson. One of the first systems I did years ago was what was called Holmes 2, which was after the Yorkshire Ripper case, where they basically had all the information to catch the guy early on, but they didn't put it together. There was a project called Holmes, which was an idea where for a major investigation, you could take all the information and put it in. And then Holmes 2 came along. And I remember one of the great features of that was that it would read all the statements and point out connections that were not defined in advance. So, as you know, you can break out fields and metadata and all that sort of stuff, but you have to know what you're looking for. And I remember there was a case, it was a rapist, and the guy was using a dog walk as cover. And they fed in all the statements, and it basically just spat out that, a teenager walking a dog was in common. And these are all, things that happen up and down the country over a few years. And the reason it was difficult was that, one witness talked about a guy with a Labrador, another one was a kid with a puppy, and the machine could sort that out and realize that there was a strange connection there. Now, even if you had sort of had the stuff that you have in detective stories of sort of, Miss Marple spotting it. Well, the problem with these cases is that they're over 5 years, they're all over the country, and it's just too much for one person to read. So, and it's that kind of thing that you're seeing now with a lot of the legal stuff where you want to be able to do stuff that very quickly.
Incredible. And I'm curious, from the economy side of things, do you think we've underestimated just how profoundly AI is going to disrupt economies? And what do you think each country should be thinking about now to remain competitive as we move forward?
Well, I think that, AI is a kind of tale of two cities. At the moment, the marketing department's gone crazy on AI. So of the pictures I get, everything is powered by AI, and 90% of it, there's no AI at all. Yeah. But let's concentrate on the last 10%. AI can do things now that just could not be done 10 years ago, and they're things that matter. So it is going to change everything. And it's going to mean, people really looking at where the value is added. And, there's lots of things AI can't do. But it is going to automate a lot of tasks that are being done repetitively by people at the moment. So I think it's a strategic technology. If you think that the new, axis of world power of things like cyber, then having AI in cyber is a national strategic need. Economically, it's fundamental. If you will not be able to compete if you don't have companies that are using these kind of technologies, because there's, not only are they much more efficient, but they can see things that the current system wouldn't deal with. So I do think there is a big change, and what we've got to look at is, I think the idea that they're going to take people's jobs away is wrong. If you look back at the late 60s, when computers started being used, people thought that they would get rid of, lots and lots of people. And actually what we ended up with was loads of IT consultants and all the people to support that. It will be the same here. There will be lots of jobs. The danger is that they'll be a bit different. And so I think education and flexibility are going to be really important in how we do that transition.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's all about bringing everyone along for the ride and ensuring nobody gets left behind. And here in 2021, we are surrounded by those tech buzzwords: artificial intelligence, machine learning, 5G, blockchain, IoT. For me, the exciting thing is what happens when all those technologies begin to converge. But I want to ask you to look in your virtual crystal ball now. And do you think there's a technology or a concept that we'll be discussing in 5 years down the line that's pretty much going under everyone's radar right now?
Well, I'm kind of, having done so many companies and technology over the years, I've taken a little leaf out of Elon Musk's book, not all of his leaves, but a few. And I like the idea of kind of doing a stretch target, one that you just don't know. And I learned this lesson the hard way. I had... years ago, I had what I would call a hooray Henry. So, Daddy was very wealthy and he was sort of going to do technology. And he came to me with this amazing idea, which was that he was going to download music over the then internet. And I sort of looked at him like he was mad and explained how long it would take to get an album down, a 16K modem, and that you'd have to, sell your house to get the storage. And of course, I was completely wrong. And the interesting thing was, being wrong's okay unless you could have been right. And I could have been right because I could have plotted on a graph the cost of storage and the rate of bandwidth. And the interesting thing is, if you do that, you almost exactly hit the moment where online music took off. It was completely predetermined. And so I'm kind of, even though things are not solvable, I think there are really interesting areas to look at. So, you take, we're just talking about, digital worlds and microflight sim. Well, put a VR on these days, and it's incredible. It's like you're sitting in the cockpit of a jet, and you can go and do outrageous things you wouldn't be allowed to do in a real jet. But imagine if you take the whole headset away, not just glasses, the whole thing. You could create that illusion. So, I think that's going to come. There are some really big technical problems in trying to solve that, but it might be possible. Another interesting one is, and this is really interesting because it comes up a lot in the AI debate. So in the AI debate, there's this concept of explainability. So people who don't know anything about AI write long newspaper articles on explainability in AI. And the whole idea is that the AI needs to be able to tell you why it made a decision. It's a completely flawed concept because you can't tell me why you made a decision. You can make up a load of bullshit about why you made a decision. But there are great experiments that psychologists do that show that how you make a decision for many of these kind of decisions, you have no idea how you did it. And you lie, basically, because when someone asks you to make a decision, you need to justify it. And it's, of course, why politicians can justify exactly the opposite thing on the same facts, because it's got nothing to do with. So the reality is that we make decisions by, rather than a few facts, 4 or 5 things, and very deterministic relationship. I decided to drive at that speed because the road was wet, and I realized that I was in a car that had good brakes. No, you didn't. You just decided to drive around the corner at that speed, And the reality is that the reason you made that decision is probably 40 or 50 things that subconsciously got fused in your mind, and you made a decision. And it probably was a very good decision, much better than if you'd actually implemented. So there is a big problem about how we communicate ideas, which is we are restricted to language. And language is defined in a way that we can only deal with about 3 or 4 variables in a sentence. And we have to have these very deterministic relationships. Well, that's not how we think, and it's not how the world works. So wouldn't it be great if you actually did have a mind interface that freed you from 4 or 5 variables? So I think there's some interesting ideas there as well, where we really can open up people to interacting with things in a completely different way. We can get around those sort of problems. So those are big out there ones. I think there's a lot of stuff there. In terms of much more day-to-day ones, those of us that spent too much time around musicians are actually the sort of vanguard of the next generation up, who spent too much time with iPods on loud. And I think hearing loss is going to be a major issue for population. And, you can now use deep learning to do amazing things with taking sounds out of other sounds and things like that. So one of the things I think that's going to change a lot of people's lives is really good hearing technologies that I think will come along in the next 4 or 5 years as well. So there's lots of different things going on. That's the exciting bit.
Yeah, it really is. And on the subject of music, one of the questions I always like to ask my guests is if there was a particular song or piece of music that has been a soundtrack to their life or just helps them focus, get in the zone before they go on stage or something like that. Is there a particular song that has accompanied you throughout your career?
Well, difficulty is given my Bruno aspiration. I could spend an hour on this one. Look, if you want the best going on stage song out there, then I'm sorry, but Imagine Dragons' Natural is hard to beat. Now, it's become a cliche because they've used it for like football and everything, but oh my God, what a song. Brilliant. But if we're going to back off that because it's overused, then I do think the nutty sound of madness is hard to beat for that. Night Boat to Cairo gets you going. But today, I think, given that we're talking about technology, I'm going to go for hardcore early German synth pop, and I'm going to go for Major Tom Coming Home, Peter Schilling.
Wow, love it.
Blow your mind.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. What a fantastic choice. I'll be adding that to the Spotify playlist. I might sneak a couple of the others in there as well, especially because Complete Madness was the first album that I ever bought as a kid. But I've loved chatting with you today. Covered so much ground in a short amount of time. But a big thank you for taking the time to sit down with me and share your story.
Oh, great. It was great fun, Neil. All right, then. Bye.
There is an old saying that it is nice to be important, but more important to be nice. And I think Dr. Mike Lynch was an absolute pleasure to speak with today. And I must admit, before recording today's interview, I was incredibly excited to meet one of my tech heroes, but also a little bit nervous because of that other old saying, never meet your heroes. But that quickly disappeared when we began talking about his story and covering everything from Darktrace to the kids from Fame and Microsoft Flight Sim. I just felt I could have chatted to him for hours. And that is why I love recording this podcast every day, by just stripping everything back and sitting down and having a conversation about simplifying complex technologies, and in a language that everyone can understand, so we can all work together and build that future and understand how technology can make a positive difference in our lives. There is so many news articles around AI and automation and taking jobs. So I think we need to talk about that, how we can educate people and how we can ensure that everybody comes along for the ride and continues to thrive in a digital age. But more than anything, I just love sitting around a virtual campfire and share real human stories of where some of the biggest names in tech, where their love of technology came from, and what kind of song they like to listen to on a Sunday afternoon. So I want to thank Mike for joining me on the podcast today, and to each and every one of you for joining me too. So remember though, any questions, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can also get me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, again, just at Neil C. Hughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So I hope you enjoyed our chat with Mike today as much as I did. But I cordially invite you to join me again tomorrow, where I have another guest and tech story to share with you. But right now, it's time for me to learn how to play Star Maker on my Bontempi organ, just like Bruno Martelli. But on a serious note, thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.